Hello, I'm Barbara Lee Diamonstein. Welcome to Visions and Images, American Photographers on Photography. Today we'll be talking to Harry Callahan. Harry Callahan is one of the world's great living photographers. He has been a photographer for more than 40 years, exploring a diverse range of picture-making ideas and concerns. A fine teacher, he was the head of the photography department at the Institute of Design in Chicago, and then a professor at the Rhode Island School of Design in Providence. We're very pleased that you could join us, Harry Callahan. In 1936, you were a young man who, after 3 semesters at Michigan State, left school, found a job, and married Eleanor Knapp. You had no artistic ambitions at that time, and as far as I can tell, very little formal art training. Is that accurate?
Very accurate.
By 1941, however, you became a photographer. Can you tell us what occurred in those intervening 5 years that prompted the change in your career and how and where you discovered photography?
Well, that's pretty, I would say, profound. A profound question to answer. I think it has something to do with my growing up and not being able to do anything that I felt good about, and finally finding photography as a hobby, and then finally finding that it was something that I really believed in. You
joined a photography club in 1941, and while there attended a number of workshops and met someone who was an important and early influence. Can you tell us about that meeting?
Well, Ansel Adams came to Detroit and gave a talk, and then he took us on a weekend, a couple of days on the weekend, and there was something about what he did that just hit me just right. I mean, this is hard to explain, but he talked in great reverence about music. He talked in great reverence about Alfred Stieglitz, who I'd never heard of, and he had pictures which were what I felt was photography. Beautiful tone and texture, and I don't think it was it were the great pictures, or the ones that are considered great of his, that really made me excited. It was the close-up pictures near the ground, which I felt that from then on I could photograph anything. I didn't have to go to, Yellowstone or Grand Canyon. I could photograph a footprint in the sand, and it would be like a sand dune. And I think this was probably the most freeing thing that could have ever been for me.
You awarded yourself a fellowship, and that was a 4-month fellowship to come to New York. Was it during the course of that time that you met Stieglitz?
No, I met him before in 1942, and then when the war ended, we had saved up money, and I had enough money, or my wife and I had saved enough money so I could maybe photograph for 8 or 9 months and live. But that's what we did. We came to New York, and I saw him off and on, but I didn't have any rapport particularly with him. I guess I'd held him as such a god almost for so long that it got to be silly, you know. And so he seemed to get sort of like a cranky old man to me. I don't like to say that because I know he was a fine person, but.
Did anything happen during that period in New York that was of importance to your work?
I don't think that, maybe, oh yes, I think I met so many people who were important. I mean, Bernice Abbott and Paul Strand and Lizette Modell and Evsa Motel and the Newhalls. And
where did you all congregate?
well, mainly Newhalls started it.
This was Beaumont and Nancy Newhall, who was then working at the Museum of Modern Art.
Right. And from then on, it meant that I got to know a lot of people who were very important.
When you started to photograph in 1938, many photographers felt that their art had to be truly significant, and for it to be significant, that it had to concentrate on social issues.
I took a few pictures of human relationships and stuff like that, and they just didn't mean hardly anything to me. So I was for them, but it wasn't for me.
Your first teaching job was at the Institute of Design in Chicago, and that was established by Maholy-Nagy. It was an extension of the German Bauhaus. Didn't they call it the New Bauhaus before it was called the Institute of Design?
Yes, that's right.
And I assume that had a very strong influence on the method that they used and the aesthetic that they espoused. Mm-hmm. What was that experience like for you, and how did you get to Chicago?
Well, I was anti-education, but ignorantly. I thought that nobody could teach anybody how to be creative. I feel that comes out of the individual. And the person who brought me to school, Arthur Siegel, thought you could teach somebody to be creative, and I used to argue with him. But he liked my photographs, and so he invited me to come to the Institute of Design. I think that it just fit me perfectly.
What were your major projects at that time?
The fact that I've been a limited person, I love photography, and I love photography. I would photograph, and I would photograph, let's say, with an 8x10 camera and photograph nature. I would photograph, and I would get all tied up and tired of looking at the image through a big camera, and so on a tripod. So I shifted to a 35mm camera, and I photographed people on the streets. And after that, in order to break away from that, I moved the camera on street lights and whatnot. What I'm trying to say is that when I got tired of one thing and felt that I wasn't functioning properly, I would move to something else. If I photographed nature, I would go to the city. And after a while, when I felt that I was dead in the city, I'd had too many bean sandwiches, so to speak, I would go to photograph people. I feel that some of the first pictures that I ever made were as good as any pictures I'll ever make again. And so, as a result, I felt that what I had to do was live strongly and to keep my photographs alive. As a result, I would have a lifetime of experience, of beginning to end. And I don't think in terms of saying my last pictures are going to be my best. I just want to have experiences in my life so that they will be alive. So in trying to answer this, I would say that probably one of the very early experiences naturally were sports as a young man, and then meeting my wife and being married, and then going to the Institute of Design and meeting all these people of Mies van der Rohe, who you speak of, and then having a daughter, then having an experience in Europe, and then my teaching experience at the Rhode Island School of Design, and now I'm sort of half-baked businessman. But I feel like all of this are, if they're rich experiences and I can look at them with some kind of meaning, that they'll nourish my photographs, and I will have hopefully a body of work that has a continual piece of life, which will show me as a young person and as an old man.
What were those first photographs?
Pardon?
What were those first photographs?
Well, the first ones, strangely, were photographs of grasses and then reeds in the water. And the goofy thing is that as I went along, many of my pictures showed line. And I thought, well, I'll photograph line. And they were no good. So I know it's deeper than that. It probably had to do with grass, and it probably has to do with hair. It probably has to do with all kinds of things.
You began your own color work in about 1941, even though you did not show them till more than 35 years later. And that was when the technology of the process was quite different, and I guess the art photography establishment was focused on black and white. What prompted you to experiment with color so early on, and what were some of the problems and some of the rewards?
I went to moving the camera on lights, and then I saw that moving the camera on colored lights, neon signs, was very beautiful. If you made a photograph of regular natural scenes in color, it looked kind of goofy, and but so it felt like you could avoid that by doing abstract.
You mentioned earlier that it was important for you to believe in something in which to believe, and I assume that it was photography that in a sense replaced that more formal discipline of religion for you.
Yes, I guess I still believe that's about as much religious as I am now, is that I have said that making a picture is like making a prayer. I mean, you're just really hoping for something. You don't really know what you're doing, I don't think.
What's the procedure that you use? Do you start with any idea of content?
Yes, I always have to have an idea, but one of the ideas is just to be someplace where I'd like to be, whether it's on the beach or in the city or photographing people.
Well, in 1950, you had a very good idea, and you knew a place that you wanted to be, and that was on State Street in Chicago. You began a series of photographs of large, close-up views of heads of people. They were passers-by on the streets of Chicago, and you photographed them with steep, upward perspectives. Is that accurate description?
I don't know. I photographed them very close. I mean, I couldn't think of any reason. I just wanted to photograph them. What I really wanted was the people when they're walking down the street lost in thought. And it was an entirely different kind of an expression. And the way I could do this was to use a telephoto lens and walk myself and photograph them when I set the camera at 4 feet with a long lens, and when their heads filled up the viewfinder, I snapped the picture. And I don't know, that was my motivation.
Well, what was your intent? Was it technical experimentation that you had in mind?
Oh, no. As I said, I wanted to make a picture. I never could do the technical thing. I mean, I'm not technical at all.
A frequent subject of your pictures is your wife, Eleanor. Among the most famous, perhaps, of these mysterious and self-contained photographs are Eleanor in Lake Michigan, Eleanor in the Chicago cityscape, and Eleanor in the nude. Mm-hmm. In each of those photographs, the viewer's impression, well, at least this viewer, the photographs have a dreamy, non-specific quality where Eleanor represents the quintessential woman.
I always wanted to photograph her. I think and I photographed her when I didn't hardly know very much about photography. And then after, in terms of meeting Stieglitz, as you mentioned, I saw his photographs of the clouds, and I thought, well, I'm going to do something like that too. And so I going to photograph water, and so I photographed water for about a year, reflections and all that. And then during that time I photographed Eleanor, and I would suppose that his project of photographing the clouds affected me maybe unconsciously, and that I wanted to photograph Eleanor. And then I continued to photograph Eleanor, and then I realized that Stieglitz had photographed George O'Keeffe, and that didn't really bother me. I thought that just sort of justified it.
Is she your favorite model, and a willing one at that?
Yes, I don't have any feeling for anybody else that way, and so and she was good at it. I mean, good in the sense that she cooperated. In photographing Eleanor, I photographed her in silhouette. I photographed her in where she's just black and white, and very contrasty. Photographed her, well, in distorted, but none of those are particularly good.
Is this your attempt to distill the content, the essence of the photograph? Do you thrive on extreme limitations?
Well, I think the way you asked me, I think that I have to keep photographing something until it's right. This is why I could never be a commercial photographer, because I couldn't. If somebody asked me to photograph those glasses, and I'd photograph them and then go away, and they'd pay me and be done. I would have to photograph those glasses for maybe a year or two in different, and I might only have to do it for a week, I don't know, but once I got what I was after, that's fine. And I like to present this in the terms that I think the commercial photographer, this makes him function best, but it doesn't make me function best.
Your work is perhaps the most diverse in all of modern photography. Other photographers tend to have specialties. Ansel Adams is absorbed by sweeping landscapes and vistas. Someone like Diane Arbus was near obsessed with the freakish. Arnold Newman is known for his symbolic portraits, but your work has been known for its eclecticism. You've photographed figures, landscape and architecture, you've photographed interiors, you've photographed objects, there are multiple image configurations, nature, and uninhabited spaces. You're interested in so many things. I wonder if you can tell us how it all evolved, how you decided not to have any special focus on any one type of subject matter.
Well, I don't think it's that I decided. I think that photography has been so important to me, and my life outside of that hasn't been such a big deal, so to speak. And so when as I say, when I got tired of photographing with the big camera, I took a little camera. And if I got tired of photographing nature, then in order to photograph, I'd have to try something else. So I would try people on the streets. And so it's just, I just want to photograph. So I continually photograph. And after a while, by functioning this way, I realized that I didn't want to be, say, a certain kind of a photographer, a window photographer, or a 8x10, or 35 millimeter photographer. I think that when you get a style, you're sort of dead.
How often does the unexpected happen in your work?
Well, it's. I think that's one of the most important things that I think for me as a photographer, is that you have to all of a sudden sense when this thing happens, and then for me, I have to make an issue of it. Once I was photographing my wife with my big 8x10 camera on the shores of Lake Michigan in Chicago, and she was standing there and smiling and looked just like a snapshot. Well, I thought, oh, this is terrific. After I print it, I'll make 8x10 snapshots. And so I started doing that. And in doing that, I mean, this is what I'm trying to answer, the unexpected. That's the unexpected. And in doing that, by continuing on that base, photographing her and she and our daughter together standing like snapshot, it drifts into something else, and you have something else.
You've been an important influence on photography, not only through your work, but through your teaching. First at the Institute, and that started in 1946, and later at RISD, and that began in 1961. Were all those years of teaching, and we're talking about more than 30 of them, a nourishing experience for you?
I get kind of emotional about it. They were murder, too. But I think that going to the Institute of Design in Chicago saved my life. And I didn't know what to do, how to earn a living or anything. And I guess in the early days at the Institute of Design, I put in more hours than I ever did in a war factory before. But I think the relationships to the students and whatnot was just unbelievable. And I think it is when I was saying the important happenings in my life, as to be at the Institute of Design, I watched the other teachers teach, and so I learned how to teach, and I was successful with the students. I don't know why. I guess you don't know why you can make a good picture, and you don't know why you can really teach either.
How important are schools for photographers?
I think a school, in terms of photography or any medium, should just be honest and aware. As I said, I don't believe you can teach somebody to be creative. I think that's their business, and that I think if there's any way that you can help them to think, to find out their own way, this I think is important. But I think education is important more in a sense to make people civilized. I mean, I don't think you can teach people to be creative, but I think it's important to have as good a environment.
In 1946, which was the same year that you joined the Institute of Design in Chicago, your work was first shown at the Museum of Modern Art in the new photography exhibit that was directed by Beaumont and Nancy Newhall.
And that was about the only place you could show anything then, and Steichen showed it. And I think that I mean, it's hard for me to talk about this because I think that, see, there wasn't much going on in photography. Photography was looked at as kind of a dopey medium, and is it art or isn't art, and all that stuff. And so the only place, just about the only place you could show was like the Museum of Modern Art. And so I was in a great many exhibits, just, like maybe one or two pictures. Every now and then Steichen would have a show. I'd take my photographs to Steichen about once a year from Chicago, and so he was an enormous, support to me.
In 1972, you started showing more and more of your color work and made that famous series of pictures of houses on Cape Cod. What is so interesting to me, and in your recently published book, Harry Callahan, Color, reveals still further that your work continues to develop, to change, and to grow. What are you working on now?
I can't say what I'm doing now. I'm just sort of floundering momentarily. I think I've got some good ideas now. I never like to say what I'm going to do, because then I might just as well have taken the picture, or vice versa.
How do you keep records, files, negatives of these thousands, tens of thousands of pictures that you've taken in the Harry Callahan Color book? If you've been photographing in color for almost 40 years, how did you select only perhaps 100 images? On what basis do you select, and how do you keep them all?
Oh, I don't. I kept selecting them all through the years, which is not a good way. I think that if you're nowadays, that there's places to show your photographs, and the way I think artists are should be able to show their photographs, that's fine. But in the old days, we would have I could never show my color. The only way I could show it is once in a while I'd be invited to give a talk and show some color slides.
Is that why you waited so long to exhibit them?
Yeah, I couldn't afford to have them printed. I think I was making $4,000 a year, and it cost $150 to have a dye transfer print made, so I never even thought about it. So over the years, you just keep selecting, and when you go show them the next time, you select some more out, and you select some more out, and so I don't know. There were an awful lot for them to choose from.
I am continually surprised by the large public and the popularity that photography has gained for itself in recent years. One will never have to question again how one finds the $150 to make that color print. You referred to yourself before, and I'll be more gracious than you were about yourself, as a semi-businessman. To what were you referring?
Well, just that my pictures are selling. I have to wrap them up and ship them, and my wife is keeping records and bookkeeping and stuff, so that's about all.
Did you ever expect all of this to happen for your career or for your life to unfold the way that it has?
No, I never. I never dreamt that that I'd ever get an income from the sale of my photographs.
Thank you, Harry Callahan, for joining us. Your modesty is only exceeded by your great gifts. I'm Barbara Lee Diamonstein for Visions and Images, American Photographers on Photography.